Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Greatest Fishing Stories Ever Told, 28 Unforgettable Fishing Tales, by Lamar Underwood, narrated by David Colacci. Preface. Fishing should be the exercise of your skills, and its rewards the places it brings you to. Negley Farson, Going Fishing. The other day, while wandering through some of the lesser-known regions of angling literature, I stumbled across the following little gem by John M. Dickey in the preface of his anthology Great Angling Stories, published in England and Scotland. The edition I have in hand is 1953, but the book obviously was first published much earlier. Against books on sport, writes John Dickey, the charge may often be laid that they depend too little on merit, too much on a bond of sympathy between author and reader. Hello! Mr. Dickey hasn't merely thrown down the gauntlet, he's smacked me across the face with it. Now, my experiences in both books and magazines have taught me that the editor's chair is often an uneasy one, but Dickey's observation is so much on the mark that he positively has me squirming. How many times, I must ask myself, have I rushed some work into print, in fact heralded its coming with gushes of praise, simply because it was authored by one of the boys, or because the subject matter struck a warm and familiar chord? What's the harm of a little lame and undistinguished prose between friends? Further words by John Dickey provide a positive answer to this dilemma. Of the anthology he has edited, he notes, "But angling is a fair literature, and no stories have here been included which do not possess, quite apart from their subject, intrinsic literary worth." Let's hear that again. Intrinsic literary worth. Now, there's a benchmark to live up to, and I'm going to attempt to do exactly that in this volume of stories, just as John Dickey did in his superb book. While poking through the works of a lifetime and reading about fishing in preparation for this book, I was struck more than once by a trend that emerged in the 80s and 90s of angling stories, mostly fly fishing, that linked the sport to self-discovery. Words like saving the soul, inner peace, inner compass, expressions of gooey sentimentality of that sort, begin to appear in dust jacket and magazine cover blurb copy. Perhaps I am weird, or just plain lucky, but I am quite sure I began to love fishing and reading about fishing when I was so young that I had not yet blundered, fumbled, and in general screwed up enough to need spiritual cleansing. The reason I sometimes had trouble sleeping the night before a big fishing trip was the sheer excitement of anticipating catching fish and seeing the places where fish lived. Both prospects aroused, and still do, in me a yearning so deep and part of my psyche that quite honestly I have little desire to trace its origins to its sources. Perhaps, as the scientific-minded might point out, the trigger that says, "Let's go fishing," might be traced to some distant hunter-gatherer ancestor who stood at the mouth of the cave every day and wondered where he was going to find something to eat. Perhaps thousands of years have left that spark alive in only a few of us, people like you and me, and not the guy down the street. But for me there is no mystery in the fact that the fish I buy at the market can never replace the fish that I pulled from the edge of the sea and now lies on the cutting board ready for broiling. Were the reverse true, that because I can buy fish I will cease all fishing myself, I would become an emotional basket case, asking myself, "What happened to you, boy?" Of course, fishing for food is only part of the story. The freezer will only hold so much. There are only so many fish dinners one can eat. Still we press on, eager as ever, armed with new tactics and equipment to meet any angling challenge. Because it's fun, damn it. This is the point in the story where catch and release comes on stage. Either because the freezer is stuffed, or because of dwindling numbers that need protection in certain places, Catch and release fishing becomes as natural to many sensible anglers as yelling, "Got one!" And it works. We are seeing many cases, in trout fishing especially, where resources would be dwindling or wiped out completely were it not for catch and release. One type of angler I do not want in the boat with me or at the fishing camp where I'm staying is the emotional idiot who fishes to prove something. He's got to catch the most and the biggest, always. The successes or disappointments of others mean nothing to him. Scratch this guy deep enough and you'll find a miserable bastard who isn't fishing for food or pleasure, but for some weird and dark obsession to excel. Now, don't think I'm saying there's something wrong with catching big fish or a lot of fish. No, sir. I'm right in there pitching to do both. But there are boundaries and limits I respect. I will always hope I'm the kind of good buddy whose eyes and ears are open to seeing your big one, hearing about your 20-fish day, and the story about the lunker that wrapped you around a limb and broke off. The time I've spent reading about fishing has always been as important a part of my fishing enjoyment as the time spent with a rod in my hand. But I do not pretend to have unearthed and read every single gem of angling literature. As much as I yearn to live up to the promise of making this a volume of the greatest fishing stories ever told, I'm quite certain my selections will not always be the ones the listener would have chosen, given the opportunity. My decisions were guided by several considerations beyond sheer literary merit. One of the most important was to not stumble blindly into focusing on one type of fishing at the expense of others. Obviously, fishing is so diverse that its literature can never be captured in a single book, no matter how ambitious. Entire libraries are needed, and indeed have been built and stocked for just such a project. The astute listener will no doubt have titles in mind that he or she feels should have been included here. And if you are keenly disappointed by the absence of one of your personal favorites, then I regret not serving you better. It is my hope that the book ahead will take you fishing in two kinds of places, those like the ones you have never fished but would like to try, and those like the ones you have fished and enjoy remembering. Places like cold rivers, where you will start out by looking for trout, but will also truly lift up your eyes under the hills and remember how fortunate you are to be there. Dark pockets under old oaks, where big-mouth bass lurk. Estuaries, where iron-muscled steelhead and salmon are fresh from the throbbing ocean currents. On some sandy beach, where the green waves are slashed by slashes of striped bass and bluefish. Out on the blue water of the Gulf Stream, where your trolled baits barely scratch the surface of the domain roamed by marlin and tuna, and on the tidal flats, where the thin, clear pushes of water give the fishing for tarpon, bonefish, and permit the visual drama of hunting. You'll find all kinds of fishing here, and all kinds of fishermen. They have wonderful stories to tell you. You'll especially enjoy them on those long winter evenings when real fishing seems a distant promise. Throw another log on the fire, get your favorite chair and lamp just right, and hope everybody in the house will leave you alone. The fact that the stories have intrinsic literary worth won't bother you at all. I guarantee it. Lamar Underwood. The Song of the Angler by A.J. McLean. Among the really great fishing writers we lost in the final decade of the last century, Al McLean's name leads my list in heartbreak. Not that he was a personal friend, I only met him once, but because he wrote about fishing with such love and feeling and intelligence that every time I saw his byline I knew I was going to be in for tremendous reading reward. In my teenage years, I worshipped McLean's words so much, I began clipping every field and stream angling editor column he wrote into notebooks. Today, McLean's best articles are collected in books, and one in particular is an absolute treasure, Fishing with McLean, published by Prentice Hall in 1975. an anthology of MacLean pieces edited with great affection by George Riger, who also includes an excellent biography of MacLean, the man, the writer, and the angler. Riger has wonderful descriptions and interviews describing how MacLean emerged from World War II after being wounded in combat in Europe to land the field and stream job and go on to angling writing fame. Back in my introduction to the book, you no doubt notice that I certainly did not dwell on creating much of an explanation of the reasons we fish. I would have probably bungled the job, and anyway, I knew what was coming. My main man, A.J. MacLean, on The Song of the Angler. People often ask me why I enjoy fishing, and I cannot explain it to them because there is no reason in the way they want meanings described. They are asking a man why he enjoys breathing when he really has no choice but to wonder at its truth. Psychologists, such as Dr. Ronald Lay, have tried to explain its mystique in terms of behavioral conditioning, but this is as oddly misleading as his comparison of angling to golf. There are also pundits who believe that the rod provides an outlet for our hostilities, our frustrated egos, or our competitive instincts, or that it symbolizes the primitive feelings of man in his search for food, ergo the need to kill. To a degree, I believe all these qualities exist in every participant in any sport, and if so, healthfully so, as it is far more harmless to vent one's spleen on a trout stream or a golf course than on one's fellow man. However, if this assumption is logical, then the rationale of angling is still without explanation. The chirping plague of analysts who have invaded every chamber of the mind from the bedroom to the tackle room has missed one thing. Angling is a robe that a man wears proudly. It is tightly woven in the fabric of moral, social, and philosophical threads, which are not easily rent by the violent climate of our times. It is foolish to think, as it has been said, that all men who fish are good men, as evil exists on all of life's paths. But to join Walton's company of honest men requires first the ability to accept a natural tempo of misfortune, not only in the allegory where failure is represented by the loss of a fish, or success by its capture, but in life itself. In the lockstep slogan of young radicals thumbing their noses at their world, reality is no longer realistic. But I would argue that life is a greater challenge than death, and that reality is as close as the nearest river. Perhaps an exceptional angler doesn't prove the rule, but then anglers are exceptional people. Lord Fraser of Lonsdale is not only a peer, but he wears the robe of an angler as well. He is a skilled fly fisherman, and when last we visited together he caught a 35-pound salmon, which was the biggest in the camp for many weeks. What's more, he could charm the socks off Willie Sutton, and I have heard him spellbind a roomful of strangers with tales of his life in South Africa while sipping rare wines, naming each chateau and its vintage. This introduction would be fatuous were it not for the fact that Lord Fraser is totally blind. Both his eyes were shot out in the First World War. A profoundly intellectual man, Fraser has developed his other senses to a point that most of the people who sat with him that night had no idea that he was unable to see them. Yet later he could summarize the physical characteristics of each person as though he was describing a rare Burgundy. I don't know if you have ever tried wading, unaided, and fly fishing a stream while blindfolded. I cannot do it, and I would probably lack the guts if I had to do it. Fraser's explanation for his ability to do this is that he can hear all things around him: the changing tempo of deep and shallow water, the curling smack of a rapid against a boulder, even the roll or rise of a fish. His ear for the music of angling is incredibly keen. Is this Dr. Lay's behavioral conditioning? In terms of a compensatory development of the senses, perhaps. But it does not explain why a man, even a blind man, enjoys angling. The music of angling is more compelling to me than anything contrived in the greatest symphony hall. What could be more thrilling than the ghostly basso note of a channel buoy over a grumbling surf as the herring gulls screech at a school of stripers on a foggy summer morning? Or an organ chorus of red howler monkeys swinging over a jungle stream as the tarpon roll and splash in counterpoint? I have heard them all. The youthful voice of the little beaver kill, the growling of the Colorado as it leaps from its den, the kettle-drum pounding of the rogue, the hiss of the Yellowstone's riffles, the sad sound of the Orinoco, as mournful as a G chord held on a guitar. These are more familiar to me than Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, and for my part more beautiful. If there are 3 B's in angling, they are probably the beaver kill, the broadhead, and the big hole. Big game angling has quite another music. The hull creaks and the outriggers clap as the ship comes into the wind, while the sea increases the tempo as she turns from stern to bow. Then the frigate birds scream at a ball of bait, and you know the marlin are below. As the ship lurches over the chop, her screws bite air in a discordant whine, and the mullet trails, skitter flap, until the pitching hull sounds like the soft rolling of drums. At last one note assails the ears, the snap of white linen pulled from the outrigger. Now the water explodes in a crescendo of hot engines roaring into life before you lean into a quarter-ton of shoulder-rocking fury. And in that ageless walking leap which follows no path in the ocean, the angler hears the most exciting sound of all, the wailing of a reel as stark and as lonely as a Basin Street clarinet. But my protracted maundering leads us away from Dr. Lay's hypothesis, which he reinforced with the learned E.L. Thorndike's thesis of punishment and rewards. What are the rewards of angling? A dead fish? A trophy? At some point, perhaps. But then it takes years to become an angler. There are tidal marks in our development. In the beginning, when one is very young and inexperienced, fish are measured in quantity. Then only quality becomes important. Eventually, even record fish lose their significance unless they are of a particular species. And ultimately the size doesn't matter, provided they are difficult to catch. The latter condition is fairly easy to find in these days of declining resources. Trout in the upper Beaverkill average about a half-pound in weight, but they can be the most demanding kind. The water is diamond clear, and at the shadow of a passing bird or the glint of sun against rod, they instantly vanish under the nearest boulder. You must work with a leader of cobweb diameter, and have enough control to drop your fly in a teacup target through a maze of overhanging limbs. There are large trout in the stream, of course, wise old browns which you might catch a glimpse of once in a while, usually in a pool that everybody believes has been emptied. Recalling the years when anglers gathered at the old Gould cottage on the Beaverkill, a temple now fallen to death and taxes, which Arnold Gingrich described in his wonderful book, The Well-Tempered Angler. You can even smell the waiters drying in the rafters. One man comes to mind who knew perhaps a bit more about the rewards of angling than most of us. Ellis Newman could cast a fly line to 90 feet with his bare hands. I saw him make 3 measured casts with tournament tackle, each of which fell short of 200 feet by inches. I doubt if a more polished caster ever lived. He had neither the time nor the inclination to compete in games, except for the pigeon-shooting circuit, which he did for money. We often fished along opposite banks of the Beaverkill, or alternated pools, just for the pleasure of each other's company. One day, when the mayflies were on the water, Ellis caught and released several good browns below the dam, one going about 3 pounds. At the top of the next run, we met a young boy who proudly displayed a 9-inch brook trout. Ellis admired it so much that I thought we were looking at the biggest square-tail captured since Cook hit the jackpot on the Nipigon in 1914. When the lad asked Ellis if he had any luck, he looked very serious. "Oh, I caught a few, but none were as pretty as yours." Ellis worked with underprivileged children and handicapped people at his own expense, and the expense was appreciable. He designed Rube Goldberg wheelchairs and tractor-driven bucket seats for fishing and for hunting as well, and he even developed a method of running steel cable through a string of boulders to build necklace dams on his eroding beaver kill. Ellis never waited for the fulmination of a new idea to die down before putting it into practice, and the people who loved him may be consoled with the reflection that angling would have suffered a greater blow had he regarded each new venture carefully. Arnold Gingrich became, as Charlie Ritz once called him, that terrible fishing machine, in the sense that he was on a first-name basis with every trout in the stream. He would appear with smaller and smaller fly rods, considering any stick over 2 ounces as heavy tackle, and any leader above 7X suitable only for salmon. But the publisher of Esquire magazine is a tremendously energetic individual, and the piston-like style of casting with flea rods was duck soup for him. Arnold earned his robe in my eyes the first time we angled together. In releasing a tired trout, he held the fish under water gently, almost lovingly, stroking its belly and talking to it. He is a master of conversation, and so help me, at times the fish swim away with an impossible but perceptible grin on their faces. Arnold has that passionate blood fire, typical of anglers, which no psychologist, nor wife who hears her husband stumbling out into an April blizzard at 4 a.m., has satisfactorily explained. One morning I was crossing the swinging bridge pool, and happened to look down. There stood Arnold in an icy torrent, banging away with a little dry fly. Something was protruding from his mouth. I didn't recall that Arnold smoked cigars. "When did you start smoking cigars?" I called. He pulled the bulbous object from his mouth and examined it as though he didn't know it was there. "Oh, that's my stream thermometer." "You're what?" "I'm sick. I have a fever." "Then what are you doing in the river?" "Ah, hell, it's only 99.8. If I break 100, I'll go to bed." Whenever somebody asks me why I enjoy fishing, another thing that comes to mind is what it means in terms of friendships. General Charles Lindemann was always impeccably dressed, cologne lashed, and wearing his stiff upper lip as counsel to the British ambassador in Washington. During the years we fished together, he had a running verbal duel with Charles Ritz for reasons which only an Englishman would feel about a Frenchman and vice versa. There was no evil lurking beneath this play of wit. It had the woolly camaraderie of barracks talk. When Lindemann stepped into the river, Ritz would ask him, "Where's your gaff, old boy?" "All Englishmen carry gaffs." Although a stranger would think that the general meant to hang Ritz with his old-school tie, they were really fond of each other. This good-natured combativeness continued until we stopped to lunch on the bank of the Stamp River one noon. A sudden change came over the general. For a moment he became misty-eyed. He told us that he had sat in this very spot with his young wife a half-century before and made his life's plans. Now she was buried in France, a geographical anomaly which he made no attempt to explain except to refer to a wartime plane crash. Later that day, while I was beaching a steelhead, I saw Ritz crawling along the bank picking wildflowers. Swearing me to silence, he carefully packed a bouquet in his duffel bag. I know the cemetery outside of Paris. I will take these to her. She would like that." Lindemann didn't know what he had done, and despite my old friend's deserved reputation as one of the world's great anglers, I would embarrass him now by saying that Charles Ritz wears his robe because he is a truly kind and loving man. The general is gone, and it wasn't until his death a few years ago that a certain irony became apparent in our secret when we learned that General Lindemann had been chief of the British Secret Service. The only psychologist I have ever met who knew anything about anglers was Dr. J. H. Cooper of Kansas City, Missouri. He made sense because he invented the marabou bonefish jig, which reveals him as a practical man. We met, as anglers so often do, through his giving me a duplicate of his lure at a time when I was having lousy fishing at Andros Island. Have you ever noticed how often anglers tend to share their good fortune? I have seen this happen many times among perfect strangers who simply meet on a stream. I remember a man who, after landing a beautiful rainbow trout below the Fair Ground Bridge on the East Branch of the Delaware, turned to a bug-eyed kid holding a 98-cent telescopic fly rod, and snipping the March Brown pattern off his leader, gave it to the boy. "See what you can do with it, son." That's all he said. I was that boy, and I can't tie a March Brown on my leader today without blessing my good Samaritan. Before you conclude that the author has broken loose from his moorings and is bobbing impotently on a sea of virtue, let me reassure you that the world is full of narrowly shrewd, self-seeking people, blind to God and goodness, and for all I know, Dame Juliana Berners could have been some piscatorial Mary Poppins or a grosser wart on the face of society than Polly Adler. But I would be untrue to my craft if I did not add that although we live in a curiously touchy age, when Mom's apple pie, the flag, and the Boy Scout's oath are losing currency, these still make a better frame of reference than Harvard's pellet-fed rats or Pavlov's dogs. Psychologists tell us that one reason we enjoy fishing is because it is an escape. This is meaningless. True, a man who works in the city wants to escape to the country, but the clinical implication is that, no matter where a man lives, he seeks to avoid reality. This is as obtuse as the philosophical doctrine which holds that no reality exists outside the mind. Perhaps it's the farm boy in me, but I would apply Aristotelian logic. The chicken came before the egg because it is real and the egg is only potential. By the same reasoning, the fluid content of a stream is nothing but water when it erupts from a city faucet, but given shores it becomes a river, and as a river it is perfectly capable of creating life, and therefore it is real. It is not a sewer, nor a conveyor of barges and lumber, although it can be pressed to these burdens, and indeed, as a living thing, it can also become lost in its responsibilities. So if escapism is a reason for angling, then the escape is to reality. The sense of freedom that we enjoy in the outdoors is, after all, a normal reaction to a more rational environment. Who but an angler knows that magic hour when the red lamp of summer drops behind blackening hemlocks and the mayflies emerge from the dull folds of their nymphal robes to dance in ritual as old as the river itself? Trout appear one by one, and the angler begins his game in movements as stylized as Japanese poetry. Perhaps he will hook that wonder-spotted rogue, or maybe he will remain in silent pantomime long into the night with no visible reward. And that, Professor, is why anglers really angle. The Return by Patrick O'Brien. Of the hundreds of thousands of readers who snatch up every new Aubrey Maturin novel as fast as Patrick O'Brien finishes them, I doubt that very many O'Brien fans realize that the author of these seagoing epics set in the Napoleonic Wars.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?